So today we're going to start with 9-1, and in Chapter 9 we're going to talk all about rational numbers and the number line.
In this topic, we'll focus our attention on rational numbers, what they are and how to use them. We'll find out what it means for one rational number to be greater than another rational number, and how a number line can be used to compare rational numbers and their absolute values. We will even see how to interpret the ordering of rational numbers in real-world situations. Finally, we will jump from number lines to the coordinate plane. We will see how rational numbers can be used to identify points in the coordinate plane and describe figures called polygons in the plane. All seems absolutely rational, doesn't it? So let's get started with rational numbers.
So we learned in Chapter 8 about integers. So go ahead and write down the word integers on your notes. It's spelled I-N-T-E-G-E-R-S. So integers, okay, I-N-T-E-G-E-R-S, and I want you to write a plus and a minus, okay? That's to remind you that integers are positive or negative numbers. So we learned that -3 and +3. Okay, we learned -2 and +2. We learned where to place those on the number line in Chapter 8, along with absolute value. Well, today we're going to learn more about rational numbers. And rational numbers are going to include fractions and decimals. So they're essentially the same thing, but they're adding additional things into this chapter.
Rational numbers are numbers that can be written in the form a divided by b, or the opposite of a divided by b, where a is a whole number and b is a positive whole number.
So you might be saying, whoa, Miss S, what does that mean? Well, let's look at it. They're just basically saying that a rational number are numbers that can be written as a fraction, okay? A over b, where we can plug any numbers in for a or b, or negative a over b, where a is a whole number and b is a positive whole number.
Rational numbers include all of the integers, 0, positive whole numbers, and their opposites. Integers can be written as a fraction, a divided by b, or as the opposite of a fraction, a divided by b. Rational numbers include all fractions, positive fractions, such as 1/2, and their opposites, such as -1/2. Rational numbers also include all mixed numbers, positive mixed numbers, such as 2 1/3, which can be written as 7/3. And their opposites, such as -2 1/3, which can be written as -7/3. And rational numbers include decimals, with which you are familiar. Positive decimals, such as 1 7/10, which can be written as 17/10. And their opposites, such as -1 7/10, which can be written as -17/10. Rational numbers include integers, positive and negative fractions and mixed numbers, and positive and negative decimals, with which you are familiar.
Okay, let's go on to part 1.
Name the location of each point as both a decimal and as a fraction or mixed number. Then name the opposite of each point and position each opposite point on the number line.
So what I want you to write on your notes are the following steps. Step 1 is I want you to identify how many times or what is the hole cut into. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to cut into, okay? So if I look between 0 and 1, I want to figure out, okay, what are they cutting this number line into? I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I have 4 over 4 equals 1, I know that each one of these lines then must equal 1/4. Okay, so when I do that, I know that the purple dot must be positive 1 and 1/4. So go ahead and write that in your notes. 1 and 1/4. Well, the opposite of positive 1 and 1/4 will be negative 1 and 1/4. Okay, so negative 1 and 1/4. Okay, what about this red dot? Well, this gets kind of tricky. I know that it's not necessarily negative 1 yet because it's farther to the right than negative 1 on the number line. So the opposite, well, let's figure out what the red dot is first. We have negative 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. So it'll be negative 3/4. Go and write that in your notes. And if you want, try and find the opposite on the number line. You can pause it. Okay. But I know that if this is 0, I have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. Okay. Let's look at this blue dot now. It's somewhere between negative 3 and negative 4. So I know I'll have at least negative 3 and 1/4, negative 3 and 2/4, or negative 3 and 1/2, because 2/4 can simplify down to 1/2. Well, what's the opposite of negative 3 1/2? Positive 3 and 1/2. Next, they will say find the opposite of the rational number represented by the point n. Well, let's look. So step 1 was to figure out how many times they're cutting our whole. So from 0 to 1, okay, I'm going to look. Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that means 8 over 8 will be equal to 1. Okay, so that means each little dash is 1/8. So I look at n. I know n is not necessarily at 3, but it's after 2. So I need to count. Well, I have 2 and 1/8, 2 and 2/8, 2 and 3/8, 2 and 4/8, 2 and 5/8, 2 and 6/8, and 2 and 7/8 is what n is equal to. And the opposite of 2 and 7/8 will be all the way over here at negative 2 and 7/8. Go ahead and put that in your notes. This question, they want to know what is the opposite, so that means I need to draw a negative, of the opposite of negative 1/3. How do you know? Okay, so if you think about it, what do you think the answer is going to be? Is it going to be positive 1/3 or negative 1/3? And they say the opposite of negative 1/3 is positive 1/3, because we know the opposite of 1/3 is negative 1/3. So the opposite of negative 1/3 is negative 1/3. The opposite of a number is always the number itself. Part 2. Explain what the number 0 represents in each situation. Then rewrite a rational number to represent the situation.
Before you choose a number to describe a situation, think about what 0 represents in that situation. I bet you'll find that it makes it easier to choose the right number.
Okay. So, the pant leg shrunk 2/3 of an inch after washing. So if you have your pants, okay, 0 in this situation represents how long your pant is. Well, if they shrink 2/3 of an inch, is that going to be plus 2/3 or minus 2/3? Well, I know if they shrink, that means they're getting smaller. So I'm going to put negative 2/3. Dad gained 1 1/4 pounds during vacation. Well, my 0 in this situation is going to represent how much Dad weighed before we went on vacation. So if Dad was 130 pounds before vacation, after vacation, he would be 131 1/4 pounds. Okay, so that means if I'm gaining, I'm adding. So it'll be 1 1/4. Okay, it is 10 seconds before blast off. Okay, if we look at before, it's going to be a negative 10 seconds because we're before they go off. Okay, if it was plus, that means they're going off after. Okay, I know that one's tricky, but the key here is before blast off. So it's 10 seconds. They're counting down before they get to 0. Okay, in a checking account, a debit represents a decrease in the amount balance, and a credit is an increase. Which rational number or numbers represents debit? Go ahead and circle which ones you think represent debit. Remember, debit represents a decrease. Circle which ones are debit, and then move on to part 3 with me.
In South America, the highest point is the peak of Mount Aconcagua, at 22,834 feet above sea level. The lowest point on land is the Valdez Peninsula, 131 feet below sea level. Explain the meaning of 0 in this situation and write each elevation as a rational number in yards.
So the first thing we need to do is underline our key concepts. We know that it's 22,830 feet above sea level. Now, many of you know to write this as a positive number. Okay, our key word here is above sea level, so we know it's positive. Okay, we also know that this next peninsula is 131 feet below sea level, so that'll be 131 with a negative sign in front of it. Negative 131 feet below sea level. Okay, explaining the meaning of 0 in this situation, and write elevation as a rational number in yards. Well, some of us may not know what to do here, okay? Because if these are feet, this is in feet, okay, this is measured in feet, and this is measured in feet, we need to find a way to get this to yards, okay? Well, we need to know how many yards, or what a yard is equal to in feet, and I know that 1 yard is equal to 3 feet. So I need to convert these, okay? So now I need to divide 834, so go ahead and write this in your notes, divided by 3, and this will give me that measurement in yards, and I also need to divide 131 divided by 3 to get that measurement in yards. So we know the highest point is positive 22,830 feet. Our lowest point is 130 feet below sea level, okay? And we know that 1 yard is equal to 3 feet. To explain 0 in this situation, we know 0 is just going to be sea level. It's not positive, it's not negative, it's just flat ground. And we need to divide, just like we talked about, use division to write feet as yards. So as I scroll down here, we find that 22,834 divided by 3 will give me my feet in yards. So when I end up measuring that in yards, I get 7,611 1/3 yard. Now remember, okay, this is showing that we had, when we divided, 1 left over, a remainder of 1. And since we're dividing by 3, this can be my 3 in the bottom, will be my denominator. Okay, they do the same thing down below. For negative 131. When they divide that, they get negative 43. So go ahead and write these numbers in your notes. Negative 43 2/3 yard, where my 2 represents my remainder of 2, and my denominator of 3, because we're dividing everything by 3. So again, it becomes negative 131 over 3 is equal to negative 43 2/3 yards.
In
Go ahead and
Australia,
solve
the
this
highest
problem
point on
by
land
yourself
is the peak of Mount Kosciuszko
and put it in
at
your
an
notes.
elevation of 7,310 feet above sea level. Which of the following express this elevation as a rational number?
So go ahead and solve this. When you're done with your homework. Come see me for help.